Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a very special episode of the Sunday Stream International News and Relations for everything that's worth watching. I figured that we would take a break today from all of the headlines that we're seeing over Ukraine and pay attention to the things that the mainstream news hasn't picked up on. And for someone to help us understand what's going on in South Africa, I've brought a good friend, Ernst Van Zyl, also known as Conscious Caracal on Twitter and YouTube, and working for AfriForum to tell us about what's been recently going on down there.
All right. Well, Prudentialist, thank you very much for having me on. Thank you for the platform, seeing as it's definitely something that we can get into. The fact that in South Africa, even though this was a high-profile case, the media seem to be ignoring the very important parts of it. And there are some very important and notable parts that we can get into. That's exactly why I've been, firstly, I work for the organization taking Julius Malema to court. So I have a job to cover the court case as best as I can, but there's also an obligation to get just a personal obligation to get the information out there because I think it's very notable. So maybe before we get into the case, maybe I should just give some small little bit of context about who I am. So I'm Conscious Caracal on Twitter and YouTube, and my name is Ernst Van Zyl, and I'm a campaigns officer for strategy and content at AfriForum, a civil rights organization in South Africa. And AfriForum is actually the largest civil rights organization in the Southern Hemisphere, but with 300,000 members, paying members, and we mainly focus on minority rights and on civil rights in South Africa. Now, both of those words might mean something completely different to Americans tuning in. But within the context of South Africa, it's actually a massive fight, specifically something you wouldn't think about minority rights. With the first thing that an American thinks of when he thinks about minority is he thinks about the minorities in his own country. But when it comes to South Africa, those minorities take on a whole different set of identities. So that's my background. That's the transparency out there. I'm not going to be shilling an organization and then pretending like I don't work for them.
And if you do want to know more about them, I have the Friends of AfriForum linked in the description. So if you want to know more about what they do and if you want to support their work, by all means, and any super chats that will be sent in this stream will be sent to them as a donation. So I guess, really, to get started would be just who on earth is Julius Malema? I understand he's quite a high-profile political figure. He has his own political party. And like many people causing trouble, they seem to be in that millennial age frame. So if you could just tell us a little bit about him and his political background.
Right. So I'm going to keep it short and sweet, even though Julius Malema does have a very long CV or very long history in regards to who he is. He's a very complex character. He's not just a two-dimensional villain, as a lot of people are painted nowadays. So maybe just the short and sweet of it is, so he started off as the leader of the ANC Youth League. Now, for those that follow South African news and South African politics will know the ANC is the ruling party, the African National Congress. They've been in power since 1994. And Julius Malema was the leader of their youth league. So the youth league of the ANC is pretty much just that wing of the party that gets ordered to do a bunch of radical and out there stuff that the main party can then look at for reference to see how people react to those things. So they almost use it as a way to test the zeitgeist or to test the Overton window. And he was the leader there. And then he was, I can't remember exactly what the reasons were, but then he was expelled from the party. And then he started his party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, in 2013. And then that's where it all started. So the Economic Freedom Fighters are pretty much, if you take the radicalism of the ANC and you condense it, then you get pretty much the Economic Freedom Fighters. Ideologically, they're the same thing, but in the broader sense. But if you really look down to their actions and their rhetoric, the Economic Freedom Fighters are a lot more radical. They are openly Marxist-Leninist. I mean, this is in their manifesto. It's in all over their website. Big admirers of Mao Zedong, big admirers of Che Guevara, big admirers of Fidel Castro. Not that the ANC aren't themselves, but then as well, I mean, this is the same ANC that renamed the street that wanted. I can't remember if they were successful. I'm going to have to go check, but they wanted to rename the street where the American embassy is on, Fidel Castro Street. And they also not last year, 2020, when that Iranian general was killed, the ANC members and went outside the American embassy and chanted "One American, one bullet," a little bit of a remix on "One settler, one bullet," another piece of violent rhetoric that they use against minorities in South Africa. So Julius Malema, again, is the leader now of the EFF that have existed since 2013, and they have amassed around roughly 10% of the electoral support. In municipal elections, they do horribly, but that's not their focus, so that's not a big deal for them. They're pretty much just focused on national elections, where they get about 10 to 11 to 12% of the vote. But they are very influential in regards to how they influence the ruling party, the ANC. So the EFF really have more influence over the ANC, the ruling party, while they're outside of it than their members had when they were inside of it. So they pretty much pressure the ANC, or pressure in very large quotation marks, to become more leftist, to become more Marxist and Leninist. So if the ANC is not doing expropriation without compensation, the EFF bullies them or pressures them into tabling it, which they then successfully did. That amendment to the Constitution was tabled in front of Parliament due to the EFF, but luckily that failed in the end. I think it was earlier this year or end last year that failed because the EFF, the ANC needed a 2/3 majority to amend the Constitution and to get that passed in Parliament. But then the EFF, they don't have a 2/3 majority, so then they needed the EFF's support to get that, and then the EFF withdrew their support because the ANC wasn't fully committed to putting all land and property under strict state ownership. So that just shows you how they push the ANC leftward. That's pretty much their goal. But as I've written quite extensively based on what I've actually written on the topic, the EFF are pretty much just the bad cop in a good cop, bad cop scenario, where the ANC pretends to be the good cop and the EFF benefit them by being the bad cop, so they can say, well, you better back us, because if we lose power, the EFF is going to take over, and then it's not going to be that nice. But the EFF and the ANC really aren't that antagonistic towards each other. That's more of like just a little bit of theater. So just to maybe conclude that little bio that I gave Julius Malema, so now we come to the present day. He has now been leader of the EFF since 2013, and he said some heinous stuff over the years. I mean, he said at a rally that they're going to cut the throat of whiteness. He's said that we're not calling for the slaughtering of white people, at least for now. In court now, with this court case this year, he said even more heinous stuff, but we will get into that as the conversation continues. But yeah, that's a little bit of a background on him, but there's still a lot to unpack regarding the man.
And this isn't the first time that he's used this kind of rhetoric before. I mean, he's been convicted, what was it, 10 years ago in 2011 for the same kind of violent, action?
Yeah, for the same violent rhetoric, for the singing of the song "Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer," Dubelai Bunu. He was the song was declared hate speech, and then all he did, well, then there was the EFF agreed that the song will not be sang at their rallies anymore, and they will dissuade any supporters that do so. That's part of the agreement they didn't meet, so they're in contempt of court, or that's what we also want to, but that's a little later in the conversation. We want to, if we are successful in this court case, we want the National Prosecution Unit to take this further, and then to prosecute the EFF for contempt of court specifically for that. But what they've did now in the meantime, because "Kill the Boer" was declared hate speech in 2011, is they've just changed the lyrics to "Kiss the Boer." But I mean, there's absolutely no misunderstanding on what they mean. They've pretty much just found this, what they seem to think is a loophole. But this is one of the arguments that we've taken on in court, is that this is absolutely not, because while you're singing this, you might have taken the word "kill" out of it, but you're still gesturing in the air with your fingers as if you're shooting guns. You're still making the sounds boom, pow, and shooting, doing the action, and saying "kill a man," and singing kill the boer, kill the farmer at support, or your supporters sing that. I mean, that happened in 2020 when though there was those massive anti-farm murder protests in the town called Caracal because a 21-year-old farmer or farm manager was murdered and hanged on a pole and beaten to a pulp in that murder. Then there was this massive protest in Caracal. There were two protests actually on two different occasions. At the second occasion, the EFF showed up as an anti or a counter protest. Now you have to really think about it. If you're showing up at an anti-farm murders protest as a counter protest, what are you protesting for? That's the question, but I think everyone knows the answer. So when they were there, they were outside the courthouse where the alleged murderers of Brendan Horner were being tried, and his family, the family of the deceased, were inside as well, the family of the victim, this young victim. And the EFF were outside the court singing "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer" at a court case where a young farmer was brutally murdered. So I mean, that gives you all you need to know. That tells you all you need to know about this party. But that's actually, when we get into this court case itself, that's actually what laid the groundwork for why we are taking Julius Malema and his party to court.
So, as we mentioned before going live, that the word hate speech probably has a totally different connotation for Americans or even those who live in Western Europe, more sort of liberal democracies rather than perhaps what we see down in the dark continent, as you like to call it. So, I mean, what would be the concrete definition for hate speech? Because you said it has a very concrete and specific meaning in South Africa. Yeah,
actually, that's the funny thing, that in South Africa, constitutionally speaking, hate speech is something very specific. It's not just someone was offended at something you said, or hate speech is something that someone finds offensive or something that hurts someone's feelings. Hate speech in South Africa, to be considered hate speech constitutionally, as the Constitution lays it out, it has to include an incitement to cause harm or an incitement to violence. So that is pretty much what in South Africa constitutes hate speech, even though in your own country, in America, when there are debates surrounding hate speech, it's usually around, but we need to make it illegal to use offensive speech. But in South Africa, we have hate speech laws, we have hate speech cases and court trials, but at the same time, this hate speech has to include and cannot not include incitement to violence or incitement to cause harm to an individual or a group.
Well, we have that in the United States. You have of course, not to incite violence or not to incite someone to, commit a murder or anything like that. Of course, our zeitgeist, to use that phrase, in the U.S. is, of course, very focused on offense or what may cause harm. The same thing is happening in the United Kingdom about, online harms bills or things like that, things that are offensive in nature, not necessarily incitement to violence or to call out and to kill an entire demographic or group of people. So it is good to know, though, that there is a mechanism, at least in South Africa, for this to be taken into action. And like we had mentioned earlier, this isn't the first time that this had happened. So
absolutely.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that's the thing, is that when you look at this court case in South Africa, that definition of hate speech as it is treated in South Africa is absolutely critical. Because I remember when I told you before we went live, when I shared this story, a lot of people actually point out, but hey, I thought people like you are anti-hate speech laws, and I'm like, I don't think you understand in the context of South Africa. It's a bit different than your culture warring over in your country about what's going on there.
So that kind of brings us then to how we got to the current trial, the current case.
Right.
What started this? Was this a recent event, or is this a different kind of legal strategy to get him on past remarks?
Yeah. So, AfriForum took laid a complaint against Julius Malema, the leader of the third largest party in South Africa, Mbuseni Ndlozi, and the EFF as a whole. And this was in the Southern Gauteng High Court in Johannesburg. And this was over the past 3 weeks. So last week, 2 weeks ago, not this last Friday, the Friday before that, the first leg of the court case has finished and concluded. So we lodged the complaint actually in October 2020 after the supporters of the EFF sang "Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer," as I told you, outside the magistrates' court in Caracal, in the Free State. And that's, of course, where the accused murderers of Brendan Horner were being trialed. So this court case then now was on the roll. It started 3 weeks ago, and it's in Johannesburg. And I mean, Johannesburg is not for. I think a lot of people from outside abroad, if they were driving through Johannesburg, it's a different place. It's not Europe. It's not America. It's I call it the generic African city, because wherever you walk in the city, you don't often see anything that indicates you're in South Africa. You just see you're in Africa, and you see different aspects of the continent just everywhere. You see this guy in traditional Sudanese garb, and this guy with like a Nigerian flag on his shirt, or this guy selling Senegalese food next to the street, but that's beside the point. So we went there to this court case. I attended for most of it. I couldn't attend all of it because I also had work to do at the office, but I was following the days that I didn't attend live. It was live streamed on our YouTube channel, AfriForum's YouTube channel. And so I see there Ernst very Afrikaans of very Afrikaans, and he does it well. Prince of Palma. I think a lot of people can hear that I am from South Africa when it comes to my accent, if that's what you mean. But so then we had this court case. I actually, like I told you off air, I attended the court case and I've watched it a second time as well, all the footage through all the cross-examination, because I've written 2 opinion pieces on it. I've done a live stream documenting it. I'm also planning to do more content on it in the future. Done a bunch of interviews, and I had to be absolutely sure about what was said in this court case. So I know it from back to front. And that's why I'm glad that you gave me this opportunity to actually talk about it, because I think a lot of people this week or in the past few days have become well acquainted with the fact of propaganda when something happens abroad. When you're not there, a lot of propaganda pretty much just destroys any type of idea that you could have about what's going on. And that's not even something just relegated to people on the outside looking in. Within South Africa, the propaganda is just incredibly vast, and it's coming from everywhere. So surrounding this case as well, and we can get into that later in the chat. But that's pretty much what I'm doing, is I want to get the clarity out there. I want people to get a good idea of what this court case is about, what was said in there, and what are we trying to achieve there. That's why I did my stream as well.
Yes, and it was very good, which is why I wanted to have this conversation, because while you're one of the biggest, names in this sphere, at least that I know of, besides maybe Ernst Rhodes, is it's mainly a South African audience, and I think that more people should be aware of what's happening there, because the things that AfriForum has done, and you and I have had conversations, not even on air, about this, I think is very important for those in the West to be aware of. So I guess that brings us to the trial itself, because you said it's been going on for the last 3 weeks. This part is finished. Is this before a jury, or is this before a judge?
No, we don't have a jury system in South Africa. This is before a judge. So you'll also see, that's actually something that a lot of people pointed out as well, is when you compare American court cases to this court case, you don't have anywhere near the amount of theatrics or like drama or almost like playing it up by the advocates. It's very cold and clinical, and let's go for an argument A to B to C, very, very procedural, and sometimes not as flashy or glamorous as a lot of people would want it to be. There's not an advocate jumping up, yelling objection, or any of that. It's very dry and procedural. But for someone like me, it's very interesting, because there's especially the cross-examination, because you can actually see the little cogs within the mind of the advocate turning as the cross-examination goes on. And that goes for the both sides, for the EFF team and the AfriForum team. But I think we did very well, and we can get into some of the things that were said, because there's some shocking stuff, things that maybe South Africans have become a little desensitized to, but something that's specifically for foreign ears are going to be very maybe hard to listen to.
And as we get into that, just to clarify, so advocate, I would assume, is just the general term for an attorney or a lawyer.
Yeah. If I remember, if I know my legalese correctly or the technical stuff, so he's pretty much a professional in the field of law.
Okay, then yeah, so he's an attorney or a barrister or something along those lines. Just wanted to make sure that we had that out there.
Right.
And as someone in the chat points out, you have a Roman Dutch legal system. So,
right.
Yeah,
that's something I pointed out before we get into the court case itself. When we were walking up to the court building, I said, isn't this a very interesting deposit of time? The fact that there's like a stone court building in the middle of this African city, and there's like on one of the corners there's like a Roman armor or piece of Roman armor carved into it in the middle of Africa. I mean, it's an interesting little, it's almost like the geographic version of an anachronism where something is out of place. But I mean, it just immediately caught my eye when we got there the first time, and I just pointed to it. I'm like, oh well, this is actually quite interesting.
Well, I guess that now kind of brings us then to the start of the trial. And like you had said, this was originally filed in October of 2020. So you're almost 2 years later.
Welcome to the South African legal system.
It's not too different from the American one for getting high profile cases.
Right.
So yeah, timing is everything. So how does this begin? I mean, of course, there's cross-examination. I've seen some of the things that were said by him, or it shocked even my ears, and I thought I've heard the worst of it. But were arguments originally presented before the judge and then the cross-examination, or?
Yes. So firstly, it starts off with the presentation of evidence.
Okay.
Evidence that's discovered, and then cross-examination starts of the many witnesses and experts. So the first week, my colleague Ernst Van Zyl was actually on the stand as an expert, because he wrote the book Kill the Boer that documents farm murders and also the relation of hate speech to farm murders, and the singing of songs like Kill the Boer. So he was cross-examination as an expert. He did very well. And then there were also farm attack survivors that were cross-examined. And then also, lastly, there was another. Oh yeah, and then lastly, a witness that was there on the day in Caracal when the EFF sang that song. Gabriel Kraus. He was from the IRR, so he was there as well. Then there was also Julius Malema, who was cross-examined. And then lastly, there was this woman, her surname is Gunner, and she was the expert on African songs. I think that's her field of study. But yeah, she was the last expert to be cross-examined. Now we're waiting. There's going to be concluding arguments, and then also we're going to wait for the verdict, but that could be some months into the future. But my stream on my channel, I was mainly focusing on the cross-examination of Julius Malema, because I think it's absolutely the pinnacle of notability of the entire court case. Not that the other parts aren't notable or very important, but the cross-examination of Julius Malema was very revealing in regards to the things that were said under oath. I mean, that was one of the things that we as AfriForum wanted to achieve. Our number one goal was definitely firstly to win the case, but then secondly, a second goal of ours has already been perfectly accomplished, and that is the exposing of Julius Malema under oath on video of just what he believes and his stance towards violence and calls to violence towards minorities, and we've got it all now. So I mean, that's a very big victory for us already. Is just exposing this guy for his bloodthirsty aspirations, and then to show that to everyone and to show that to the world. Maybe to start off. If people want to go watch the entire court case, they can find it on AfriForum's YouTube channel. The entire thing is there. And that's why on my stream I also gave timestamps for when certain things were said. But I don't think I'm going to waste time on this stream with that. You can go watch my stream if you want specific timestamps. I'm not going to mention anything here tonight that I didn't mention on that stream as well. It's going to be pretty much the same thing. So maybe just one thing to start off with is you'll find this clip on my channel as well. So this was on, when was this? I think it was on the second day of the court case. The AfriForum team, was exiting the court building, and there were EFF supporters outside, and they were chanting and singing, and they were blocking the gate so we couldn't get past. And then the police had to disperse them so that we could get past. And then they started singing and chanting in our faces, "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer." And that we got that on video, because as we were walking out, I told one of my colleagues, just I think you need to record while we're going out here, because maybe something will happen. I don't know. Better to have it on film than not, if something were to happen, because these EFF supporters were looking like they were looking for trouble. They were trying to intimidate us. But as I said on my stream as well, I'm not really intimidated by behavior that's very childlike. So if you're just throwing a tantrum and jumping around out there, it's not very intimidating. But at the same time, singing things like "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer," whether your display is not very intimidating, the lyrics themselves are still a call to action, are still a call to violence. So there's no joking about that. But yeah, so that happened. We got it on film, and then we showed it in front of the court the next day. And then when Julius Malema was cross-examined, he was asked, do you denounce your supporters for chanting "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer" at the AfriForum team? And he said, I don't. I can sing that and chant that myself.
Well, I guess that sort of brings us then to put it in a wider context, because I know that there's a lot about what Malema has said and what he believes, just from following you these last couple of weeks, that we can show, and I'll probably show that clip in just a second. But actually, I kind of wanted to take a step back and start with the initial witnesses, what Ernst had said, because he is the expert. He wrote the book.
Right.
So, what was the outline of his argument? How did this? How did he open?
Well, he gave pretty much a very detailed overview of the relationship between hate speech and farm murders. So he gave examples of case studies that he includes in his book of people being brutally murdered and tortured on their farm, and then the words "Kill the Boer" being written in blood on their walls. He also gave testimony on different cases where farm murderers testified in court under oath that for him, murdering white people was like going to work, and that he was influenced by songs like "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer." And then he also gave evidence on just the array of different, well, not different, but the disproportionate amount of cases in farm murders in South Africa where you get horrible torture, people being tortured in some of the most horrific ways. And I remember on my stream, Advocate Oppenheimer, who's AfriForum's advocate, he read a quote from Ernst's book on how this one elderly woman and her daughter were tortured and killed and tortured to death. And I remember pausing just halfway through the clip and apologizing to my audience that I didn't give them a warning, because it's very, very graphic stuff. It's the type of stuff that I can genuinely understand is upsetting to people when they hear it, especially if you've been the victim of this type of crime or know someone that's been the victim of this type of crime. But that's Ernst's book, it's just filled with these stories documenting it. And that's the thing, is that there are some parts of that book that I haven't read. I started reading them, some of the stories or some of the accounts, and I had to stop because it's too horrible. And it's for someone like me coming from a farming community, it does impact you a lot more when you come from that type of background and know a lot of farmers. And I practically grew up on a farm because all my friends were on farms, because I grew up in a rural town in the Western Cape, South Africa. So yeah, that's why we do what we do, is because of this. And but yeah, that's a summary of what Aaron said, and then he was cross-examined, but on the evidence that he presented. So there's not really something that I should highlight there that I think isn't self-explanatory. They didn't really come out anything in the cross-examination that I think was like damning in regards to. That's what the EFF legal team tried to do, is discredit him as an expert. But they, except for pointing out some technical stuff like what was the one thing they attacked or grilled him for hours on like the format of one of his footnotes on how he referenced it, and it's just boils down to nothing. So I'm not going to even get into that. But that was his testimony. And then also there's after him there's Gabriel Kraus, who gave his witness testimony of what happened on the day.
Certainly says a lot when your opposition, or at least those that are to counter you, are flimmering and going over footnotes in a book rather than the evidence that is clear as day before them. And we'll get to what was said, and what, as you said, you guys had accomplished your goal of making this on the record under oath in public. But how is the South African media treating this case? Because, like we had mentioned at the beginning, right, that we're probably well acquainted with lies and whatnot. I'm sure you're probably seeing the same.
No, that's something I noticed on my stream, is when I was highlighting all these clips and playing all these clips of what Julius Malema said under cross-examination. I was actually shocked by the amount of people in my live chat saying, I did not know he said this. This is absolutely appalling. I was unaware of this happening, or I didn't know this was said, or I didn't know he said this under oath. I can't believe he said this. There were so many of those messages. It actually caught me a bit off guard. I didn't realize so many people were just unaware. Because, I mean, I understand the majority of people don't have the time to watch hours and hours of a court case. But that's where the media should come in. They should be able to take those hours, and their job is to then condense those hours into the most important and notable points. And I have to say, with a few exceptions, they failed miserably in that regard. I mean, I saw so many headlines focusing on Julius Malema making a trivial remark in court of, I'm going to be president one day and you're going to like it, or something like, I'm going to be president one day whether you like it or not. He said that in court. Typical political grandstanding. And then the media just jumped on that and made that the headline story. I mean, it was on the front page of all the newspapers and on the online medias or everywhere. Julius Malema says, I'm going to be president one day. It's a trivial remark. It's not notable in the slightest, but that's the story they focus on, rather than some of the other heinous and things that he said that have real world effects that we will get into. Like, for example, let me just start off with, let me give you an example of something that was almost completely ignored, or when it was mentioned, there was I remember one newspaper making this the headline of their story, this quote that I'm going to give you now. The others either just flatly ignored it, or they reported very quickly on it in passing in like the 5th paragraph of their story on the trial. So what he said was, and this is, I think, something that I want everyone to take note of, because it's shocking, it's revolting, and it has a lot of real world consequences. So Advocate Oppenheimer firstly asked Julius about what he said in the past, where he claimed that he said it more than once, where he said to a crowd of people, we're not calling for the slaughtering of white people, at least for now. And then Advocate Oppenheimer asked him about that, and he said, now, Mr. Malema, now that with that context in mind, would you, and I'm not quoting him verbatim, I can't remember exactly what he said, but maybe I should get the quote here in front of me. Here, it's not the verbatim, but this is how I wrote it down. So, and you can go see the clip. It's actually, if you type into the YouTube search, Julius Malema says that he may call for the slaughtering of white people in the future, you'll find it. There's a clip of it. So he said that, Advocate Oppenheimer asked him, would you pledge that you will never call for the slaughtering of white people, that you will never call for the slaughtering of white people? And Julius Malema said, yes, I will pledge. And then Advocate Oppenheimer pushed him. This was actually a very shrewd move, or very incisive move by him, because then he said, well, in that case, do it now. We've got time. Pledge in front of the court right now under oath that you will never call for the slaughtering of white people. And then immediately Julius changes his tune. Then he backs off and he says, no, I'm not going to do that. And then Advocate Oppenheimer asks him pretty much, so if you can't rule it out, could it be you that calls for the slaughtering of white people in the future? And then Julius says, yes, it could be me. That's the leader of the third largest party in South Africa. He can't bring himself to rule out the possibility that he might one day maybe be tempted to call for the slaughtering of an entire racial group. Can't bring himself to it. And here's the most shocking thing: he could have just lied. If he really wanted to be just wanted to bat the question away, he could have said, "Oh, of course I'll pledge that. Yeah, I'll never call for the slaughtering of white people." And then one day, if he actually wants to do it, he just does it, and what's going to happen then? But no, this guy has the absolute arrogance to sit there and say, well, nothing's going to happen to me. Well, according to him, that's how he feels. It's like, I can just say under oath, I refuse to rule out the possibility that I will ever call for the slaughtering of an entire group of people based on their race. Wasn't the media story, wasn't the headline. Media didn't focus on it at all. It was brushed off. It was just completely ignored, or when it was mentioned in passing in like a small little paragraph at the end. But this should be the story. Leader of third largest party in South Africa says he can't rule out that he will never call for the slaughtering of white people. But that pretty much just showed. I saw the sideline opinions in the chat says Breitbart reported on it. Yes, they did. I think that was the only international media outlet that I saw report on it, and I'm very grateful for that.
Well, for two things. One, I'm going to appreciate how objective and how, I guess, reserved you've been in saying this. I know that you were there in person, and I'm sure that was probably tough to listen to, so thank you for that. And then secondly, I guess, would be that, what are his political chances? Like you had said, the media reported that, on that trivial grandstanding that he might be president one day, whether you like it or not. I mean, what would be his odds for having any major leadership or policy direction in South Africa?
Well, there's you can't really rule it out because there's many avenues to power for Mr. Malema. So firstly, the first scenario would be for his party to win a national election and then he becomes president. I don't really see that happening. I can't see that his party gains enough, the EFF gains enough support to win. But there is a much more realistic scenario, and this is actually something that I think there's a very large chance that this could happen. And this is if the ANC is rapidly losing support. In the 2024 election, last year in the municipal election, which is pretty much like I don't want to call it the South African equivalent of the midterms, but it's pretty much to elect leadership on a municipality level. Okay. But in that election, the ANC dropped below 50% for the first time in their history. So that is a very grim projection for them for 2024, when the South African and the American national election falls in the same year. So it's going to be a horrible year. It's going to be a horrific year because that's all people are going to be able to talk about. But this means that the ANC very likely in 2024 is going to be looking for coalition partners if they don't get their majority, which means they're going towards probably the EFF to get their majority, the coalition partner to get their majority, and then Julius Malema, in all likelihood, would give them the ultimatum of, we will give you your power, but you have to make me, for example, the deputy president. And the thing about South Africa and our politics post 1994 in the ANC era is that the deputy president is almost locked in as the next president when the current president is either voted out by the party or if he serves his full terms. Which means if Julius Malema gets the deputy president position, he is pretty much, if you're a betting man, he is at odds of like 80 or 90% that he will be the next president of the country. And I mean, that's a very realistic path to power for him.
And so these municipal elections, I would assume, are things such as mayoral elections or anything like that. Okay.
No,
okay.
That's pretty much a good counterpart or a good idea of what it is. Yeah.
So you can already tell on a local level the resentment or just the dissatisfaction with where the ANC is going. So yeah, that is a very terrifying aspect that he could be lockstep in for power via coalition.
Yeah. Well, the future of South African politics is absolutely coalition politics. I mean, there's no doubt about it. That's that's where we're heading. So, and that suits parties like the EFF. I don't think Julius Malema has any delusions about the EFF winning a national election. I think his strategy, if I can indulge in some speculation, is to gain as much support for the EFF as possible, to the point where when the ANC need a coalition partner, he has as much power in his hand as possible.
And so, despite everything, and with the ANC, the EFF, and how the press kind of operates, we kind of know as Americans, at least here in the West, right, that the press isn't our friend either. How is he portrayed in the press? Is he seen as some sort of valiant figure, or is he just seen as some sort of rogue?
Well, Julius Malema is absolutely a media creation. When Julius Malema sneezes, he gets a poster-sized picture of himself on the front page of every newspaper. He was adored by the media for years as this. Yes, what do they call him? They call him like a robust new addition to South African democracy. They fawned over him up until the very moment that he started attacking journalists. Then he wasn't so nicely treated anymore. But he's not despised or attacked on the level that you see some other political leaders. He's still pretty much fawned over by many of the people in the media and in the South African columnist party, as I call them. There you get a lot of people still fawning over him. And I mean, and that's why. I mean, if you really took someone like Julius Malema, if you really thought that if you thought what he said was condemnable, and you thought what he said was horrific and shouldn't get any platform, you wouldn't be making your headline story is national poll. Do you think Julius Malema is going to be president one day? Vote at the bottom of the article. No, that's not what you do when you think what they're saying is reprehensible. That's what you do when you think what someone says is silly. That was the main story on most of the mainstream media outlets in South Africa looking at the case, because they looked at the case and they wrote their stories about how silly Julius Malema was. He made so many entertaining, funny remarks. He blew a kiss at AfriForum's advocate. That was so funny. Let's write 5 paragraphs analyzing his good points that he made about what his party stands for. And then these columnists have the absolute, just the gall to go and say, well, AfriForum should never have lodged this complaint or this court case, because now they just gave Julius Malema a free platform. I'm like, that's not how a court case works. If you take someone to court, a murderer to court, nobody's going to say, well, you gave that murderer a platform now to do all his heinous ranting. It's just, you're trying to blame the party that's taking the person to court that's saying heinous, dangerous things. But you're trying, and that was pretty much the line that we got from many analysts today. It was that well, firstly, there's the equation line. I mean, maybe Americans and people abroad can actually learn something from this, because this is how radicals are treated extremists are treated in South Africa if the media like what they say. Firstly, AfriForum, the party the organization taking the EFF and Julius Malema to court, the civil rights organization that's never called for violence or has called for anything that's going to destroy anyone or that's going to harm anyone, is equated. Firstly, that's the first propaganda tactic. Say, well, AfriForum and the EFF are just two sides of the same coin. Ernst Van Zyl and Julius Malema are just two guys that are the same, or whatever. Which is, if you can't tell the difference between the guy that says he can't rule out that he will never call for the slaughtering of an entire group of people, and the guy and the organization that's taking him to court, if you can't tell the difference between those two, you're either malicious or ignorant. And I'm not going to fall for Hanlon's razor of like, don't attribute to malice what can be attributed to ignorance. At this point, if you're still attributing to ignorance many of these journalists and opinion piece writers write about Julius Malema, all these fawning pieces or these mischaracterizations of AfriForum, then I can't help you. This is now fully in the category of malice at this point. The next strategy was people pointing to the money motives of AfriForum and the EFF. They're like, oh, they're just doing this to get money. AfriForum just wants people to be afraid so that people can donate to them to get money. I don't think informing people that the third largest political party's leader can't rule out genocide is creating like a boogeyman. I think that's pretty much just informing people, hey, this is something that people need to take note of. Secondly, to all those journalists that make that assertion, I remember I actually responded to one of them where I said, as someone that grew up in a farming community, as someone that know people that have been affected by farm murders and farm attacks, as someone that's talked to these victims, the victims that have survived, as someone that has consoled a loved one over the phone while there's a attempted attack on their family's rural plot or their rural property. As someone with that background, I can say your assertions about my motives is a fucking disgrace, and you should be ashamed of yourself. Your characterization of my motives and my colleagues' motives. So that's all I have to say about that. And then the last little propaganda spin that they tried was one of the guys wrote that only thing AfriForum really achieved with this court case is they made black and white South Africans choose sides. Now, if you really struggle to choose a side between the organization taking Julius Malema to court and Julius Malema, the guy that can't rule out genocide, then your moral compass is rotten to the core. Like it's almost funny in how malicious this type of spinning is.
I don't think we've had anyone that publicly and openly violent in the U.S. or in the West to have that kind of fawning or just blatant ignorance of what people are saying. So again, I'm glad that you had the opportunity to come on and sort of let a more Western, non-South African audience know about what's happening. And so I guess that also is important because, like you had mentioned at the beginning, that you are a campaigner for AfriForum. You do write for them. You were in attendance. And you mentioned that they're a civil rights organization, which, of course, here in the U.S., that might have a totally different meaning. We kind of consider ourselves under rule of a Civil Rights Act constitution from the 1960s. But what in your view, is civil rights in the South African perspective and AfriForum's perspective, as well as your own?
Well, in South Africa, civil rights would be, for example, your right to privacy, your right to not have people sing about killing you in public. Maybe not in those specific terms, but you get the idea. Rights like, for example, where government encroaches on people's rights, like their right to privacy, their right to freedom of movement, their rights to bodily autonomy. These are the types of things that we do a lot of court cases for. So maybe I think better would be examples of court cases that we've recently had success in. So the one was the Tourism Relief Fund that we took on in 2021 or 2020. Can't remember. One of those. The 2020 and 2021 just merged together as one horrible super year. But anyway, there was this tourism relief fund that the ANC government of South Africa tried to, they did get the tourism relief fund going, but they wanted criteria for it that stated that you have to, your business to be eligible for this COVID relief during a pandemic has to adhere to these racial criteria when it comes to your management, for example, or people in employment. So you have to conform to these racial criteria, or your struggling business that's going under is not going to get any type of relief. So that we took them to court, and we won that court case against the government, and it was declared unconstitutional and illegal to have that racial criteria there. So that's another example of that. We also got quarantine camps in South Africa. The government wanted to put people in quarantine camps, took that to court, won that court case. Quarantine camps were closed. Before that, we took on, and these are all civil rights issues in South Africa, we took on the expropriation without compensation, did presentations before Parliament against it. You can actually find my presentation before the South African Parliament on my channel. And that's one of our other big things, is taking on, for example, your right to property rights, defending that in South Africa. That's another civil rights issue that we very much focus on. And then minority rights. So that comes in as linguistic groups, cultural groups, racial groups that are minorities in South Africa that are being discriminated against based on their race or their language or their culture. Linguistically, this would take the form of, for example, tertiary education, where students are denied the opportunity to study in their mother tongue, which would be Afrikaans, seeing as there are many languages in South Africa, but only Afrikaans is the only language in South Africa that was developed to that academic level where it can be used as in a tertiary environment as a language of instruction. And that's one of the civil rights issues that we also take on, is where people are, specifically students, are discriminated against based on their language. We take on those cases. Then also we take on national health insurance, which is pretty much our version of your nationalized healthcare. Where the government wants to nationalize and centralize all healthcare under the government umbrella, and there can't be any private healthcare. That's something else that we're taking on. And then lastly, we also take on, we help to make rural security better by having, and also just security in general, by having almost over 150 neighborhood watches all over the country. And then we also fix a lot of potholes, do a lot of maintenance work, and make sure that communities keep running and are safe. So civil rights in South Africa are very broad, but it pretty much boils down to firstly constitutional rights in South Africa, and then lastly, added to that also many rights that you would find in the Constitution, like property rights, freedom of speech, and then also bodily autonomy, and etc. I don't know if you're still there, Prude, or if you dropped out. Otherwise, this is my channel now. So while we're waiting, maybe you just dropped out to go check something or fix a technical difficulty, I can actually get into some of the other quotes that were revealed under cross-examination of Julius Malema. So another quote, I see you're back, Prude. I just said if you're offline for more than 10 minutes, the rules state the channel's mine.
No, okay. Well, good thing I wasn't here for 10 minutes.
So, I just wanted to get into another quote that Julius Malema also said. I've concluded my explanation of civil rights. I don't know if you want to comment on that first.
Well, no, well, it sounds like a lot of the things that you've mentioned are things that many of us in the U.S. kind of have been at least taking for granted. We do, of course, in the U.S., there are organizations that sue for the right to privacy or sue for bodily autonomy in the medical system under law. But these are things that I think for most people in the U.S. and probably in parts of in Europe that we just take for granted.
Property rights is another good example.
Yeah, property rights, the freedom of association, or language accommodations. All those things that we take for granted in the U.S. probably in part due to our status as a majority demographically, although that may change in coming years in the U.S. So that's why I have a lot of focus and a lot of affection for AfriForum, because you guys, I think, have done the groundwork for what other people in other parts of the Western world should pay attention to and maybe set up on their own. But I guess the other question is while you've mentioned in these cases with civil rights, so about whether it's language or education, have you guys represented anybody that isn't explicitly within Afrikaans or within, I guess, a white demographic to be generalized?
Yeah, absolutely. We've done. We actually do a lot of cooperation with traditional communities in South Africa. My colleague Barend Ace does phenomenal work here. We've helped the Baroka Seleka tribe in a dispute where they are actually, if I remember the details correctly, talking under correction, they're taking on. They are the rightful heirs to a throne, but they were dethroned by a political faction. We're actually assisting them there. We do a lot of work where if there's a land invasion on a farm, we don't care about the race of that farmer. We help them if they need help in the community. If there's like illegal land occupations on their farm, we go assist them. Same with farm murders. Our farm murder statistics don't have racial criteria built into them. If a farmer is murdered on his farm, if he's black, white, colored, Asian, he is put into the statistics. And then also we've done many other cases, like, for example, we've won a court case of a school that was promised in the Nkandla community in KwaZulu-Natal. Government didn't go through with it, so we got a court order that school was built, and that is in a 100% black community. We've also done many other cases where we, for example, we have a private prosecution unit as well. A prominent South African soccer player was murdered. He was a national team soccer player. There was no justice for his family. His family were desperate, and they came to AfriForum and asked if we could help them. And we obliged, and we helped with the investigation of that murder because, as we said in that case, if a high-profile soccer player in South Africa can get murdered and there's no justice, what chance does the average person stand? And also, what chance does one of our members stand? So we do a lot of this type of cross-community help as well. We're pretty much a civil rights organization in that regard, where if someone's civil rights are being violated in South Africa, we will help them. But we do also have a priority towards our members. We can't help everyone. Our CEO, Kali Kriel, always jokes and says, if the government were to give us just a little bit of a slice from the taxpayer money that they get, then we'd be able to help a lot more people. But unfortunately, we're limited to the amount of money that we get from our members. And I mean, that's also the type of model that I think a lot of Americans and people abroad can learn from. Is we don't go hunting for big donations from like the billionaires or from very big moneyed interest in South Africa, because the big risk that then comes in is that person that gives you a massive donation can then tell you, well, I want you to focus on this, or I want you to not focus on this. I want you to stop doing this. So we rather have 300,000 people giving very small amounts, like in dollar terms, it would be $2 or $3 on average per person. And that makes everything that we do possible. And I think that's the model that you need to do. Don't go chasing Thiel money and think you need that to be successful. But that's also something interesting that comes up when many of our detractors, when they look at detractors on the right and the left, to be very clear, when they look at AfriForum, they always have all these extravagant conspiracy theories of they must be backed by X, Y, and Z, or this person, or this organization, or this secret society. But it just shows that we live in such a time where, rather than being able to conceptualize that 300,000 people can coalesce around a common good and coalesce around a common cause, people's minds would rather believe that that's too absurd. It must be some type of massive billionaire giving them money, or they must be in league with, I don't know, some secret organization or secret society, rather than believing the actual reality that 300,000 people can believe in something bigger than themselves and would give their hard-earned money to help fight for that cause. But it is very telling of our times.
Well, that kind of brings up two questions that I wanted to ask you. One that we've gone over in a previous stream about South Africa. But the second one I think is very important, since you mentioned crowdfunding. We recently saw what took place in Canada and the protests that happened in Ottawa, and we had saw that the government had basically frozen bank accounts, frozen websites, and made sure that funding that the people had donated across the world, whether in the United States or in Canada, was not going to the people that needed it, or went to the organization or the organizers. Is that a fear that you guys have, that maybe one day the South African government might just shut down your access to banking, shut down your access to receive donations from home and abroad?
No, that's always a risk, man, when it comes to funding. I mean, this is not something that we brush off as, it's never going to happen. I mean, this year has proven that it will happen, even in the most enlightened of democracies, if you want to use that term. But it's something that we are thinking very hard about. There's a lot of robust conversations and planning and strategizing around that very question going on by people much smarter than me. So I wish I could be able to give you exactly this is the plan, but this is a genuine risk. But why I think why those conversations are still going on is that there isn't a simple answer. There isn't just, well, Bitcoin solves this. It's not that simple. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this when in regards to becoming state proof. That's one of the catchphrases or terms that we use is becoming state proof. That's what we're doing. But when it comes to becoming state proof financially and getting completely independent from banks, that is something that is incredibly complex, and that's something for some that needs some big brain energy. That's not just something you figure out by reading a Twitter thread on why crypto is the answer. I mean, crypto could be the answer. I don't know enough about it, but I can assure you that this is something that we are considering and thinking about very, very consistently and very devotedly behind the scenes, because it is a genuine risk, as this year has very, very clearly demonstrated.
Well, that brings me to the second question. We've had you on almost a year ago now when the riots were happening. I had you and Robert Digan come on along with Mr. Patriarch. That was a great conversation. If you want to know more about sort of South African history, I would recommend that you go tune in there. But I'll bring up the question to our viewers now is that in the U.S. and in the West, I think that there's a very already preconceived notion of racial categorization in especially in America. What would it be different in say, in South Africa? Because you say the word colored, and someone in the U.S. might think, oh, old signs from Jim Crow South in the 1950s.
Yeah. No, that's the thing, is that in South Africa, well, the previous apartheid regime did use the racial categorizations of black, colored, white, Asian, and other, if I remember correct, and Indian. Indian is a race in South Africa. So the thing about the ANC is that they took those racial characterizations or categories and they just appropriated them. They just still use them, but they don't use them in the way that the apartheid government used them. They just use it in different directions. So, for example, BEE, that's something that you'll hear about quite a bit in South African stories or politics. BEE, that stands for Black Economic Empowerment. Now, that sounds lovely. I mean, it sounds like being an anti-fascist. It sounds like a denazification, if you want to use a more relevant term from recent current affairs. But when you look at what it actually entails, it is a horribly discriminatory policy that just ends up enabling corruption. So BEE is pretty much just a euphemism for racial discrimination in favor of Black South Africans. Which means that if you want to be BEE certified as a business, you have to have a certain percentage of Black people in your management and in your employment. And this is something that, and maybe just I explained this in the previous stream, I think, but just again for context, seeing as you mentioned it, colored in South Africa is a ethnic group. It is people of mixed race background, people of Khoisan heritage, and people of Malay and Indonesian heritage that live mostly in the Western Cape. They speak Afrikaans. They don't consider themselves Black. They don't qualify for Black economic empowerment policies or affirmative action. So they're a group on their own, and they self-refer to themselves as coloreds.
Yeah, well, again, it's an important clarification, especially because someone in the U.S. might be listening to this right now or tomorrow, and they'll be like, what on earth are you all talking about? So always an important clarification then for sure, which I think kind of gives us a good transition now that we have, a good background on South African politics. It's, it's racial politics to sort of get back to the trial at hand, because once we had you had AfriForum's experts on, and then of course comes the inflammatory and infamous character that is Mr. Malema. So how did that start?
Well, yeah. So firstly, I think, the first day was just our advocate asking Mr. Malema about what he believes, what his ideology is, what his party stands for. That was pretty much just to lay the groundwork to make sure that everything that they characterize themselves as is on the record and under oath. But nothing notable came out there that I think hasn't already been documented. But as I've spoken to Advocate Oppenheimer as well, and I think that day went very well in regards to the bigger picture, because what it did was it actually just lulled Mr. Malema into a false sense of security that he thought, well, I can just go off and I can just talk about what I want. This guy's just going to throw underhanded passes at me and I can hit them all out of the park. But that actually got his ego very much fed, and that leads us to day 2. But maybe one of the things that was said on day 1 of his cross-examination that I thought was very illuminating was the fact that Julius, Mr. Malema said that, and this is a direct quote, if everything that we sing, or well, he meant the lyrics in the songs that the EFF sing, was meant in a literal sense, we would have taken guns and shot them in the air the way we are doing with our hands. So when they're singing the song Kill the Boer, they shoot in the air, ba, ba. So then Advocate Oppenheimer asks him, and this was a very sharp question. He asks him, would you ever stand on a stage with a real gun and shoot it in the air? And then Julius Malema refuses to answer, and he kind of loses his composure for a second. He says, you're trying your luck, because he knows that he is being taken to court by AfriForum next week in March for the firing of what appears to be a automatic rifle in the air on a stage. So that was a very smart little question by Advocate Oppenheimer. And then what else happened on the first day was, Julius Malema was asked if he condemns his supporters at Caracal that sang "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer," and he says, "No, I don't condemn them. They were singing that because they were angry." And there was just a lot of farm murder denialism and hypocrisy going on. Like, for example, we played as evidence a clip from his speech at Caracal where he said there's no murdering of white farmers in South Africa. Now, you might think, wow, that's an incredibly radical piece of denialism there. Well, he's not the first guy to have said it. Our president currently was the first man to have ever said that when he was interviewed by Bloomberg in New York City in 2018. Our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, said to Bloomberg on an international stage, and I quote, "There's no murdering of white farmers in South Africa." So it's not Mr. Malema was just quoting the president of the country when he said that.
Well, now that he's lulled into that false sense of security, backing up, what your president had said. So it's day 2, right, where the sort of the bigger, bombs get dropped. Right.
No, absolutely. Because then day 2, so the first day that he was already asked under oath. Mr. Advocate Oppenheimer told him, you're playing a very strange game here where in front of your supporters, you're very radical and extremist. But here in front of the cameras, you try to pretend like you're a moderate. And then here you can see Mr. Malema's ego getting the better of him, because then he says, no, I never said I'm someone moderate. I'm very radical and very militant. Then on the second day, he was again, because then now that's on the record. Now, Advocate Oppenheimer asked him again. He asked him about the EFF as a party. And again, Mr. Malema described the EFF as very radical and militant. And then Oppenheimer asked him whether he would endorse the use of violence to achieve the EFF's revolutionary aims. And then Malema responds, and this is a direct quote, "When the time comes and the conditions on the ground necessitate that arms must be taken, we will do so without hesitation." That's a direct quote under oath. And then also, maybe just one final quote that I remember from the first day was when Oppenheimer asked him whether white people in South Africa can be victims. He answered, direct quote, "No, not at the current moment. No, 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 no." I mean, this is Americans are very seem to be very animated and very critical of critical race theory at the moment, but this is its logical end game. This is not AOC. This is next level stuff. This isn't white people are inherently racist. This is like white people can't be victims of any crime. That's not possible.
Yeah, that's kind of how I've been looking at this and viewing it, is that this is just the logical conclusion of the rhetoric that you see in a lot of Western countries, the U.S. especially, as as a cultural export. I mean, this is the same kind of thing that Emmanuel Macron of France has been very adamant to not want in his country. And yeah, this seems to just to be the logical conclusion of that attitude, that teaching, that ideology within universities in the U.S. And now you're seeing it, of course, by a prominent political figure who's got that kind of power.
Absolutely. I mean, that's your case in point. You need to be able to, if you want to show where critical race theory is going, you just point to leaders in South Africa like Mr. Malema. And I mean, that's then you just need to see where, I mean, you even just have to listen to his rhetoric just for a short while to realize he's hitting all these notes. He's not like a classic Marxist figure from history where you don't get any of this reference to things like intersectionality and reference to like all these buzzwords that you would find in like commentariat American Empire stuff, but you get it in Julius Malema's rhetoric where he's talking about like it sounds weird when you phrase it like this, but he focuses on like he would talk about black people in South Africa like they are in exactly the same place or position as black people in America, and you don't see the disparity between those two groups in regards to their position in society or the power that they wield. I mean, there was a point in the court case where Oppenheimer tells Julius Malema they were talking about power and how you can't be a victim if you hold power. And then he asks him, what race is the president of this country? What is the race of the head of the army of this country? What is the race of the head of the police of this country? What is the race of the... he just goes through all these positions of power, and Julius Malema answers, yes, black, 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 black. And then he still gets to the conclusion, no, but still there's no power here. But that's where it goes.
Well, it's kind of how it's like I said, it just seems like the logical conclusion of, you know, what's being ideologically exported out from the U.S. and like for us in America, right? Like the media doesn't cover it, or it's very slanted, and most Americans don't have an idea. And now here you all are front and center, kind of seeing the logical conclusion of it and putting it out to the press.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I mean, that's what we need to do. But then at the same time, we're condemned for doing that by the South African Columnist Party. And unfortunately, that's something that we have to deal with whenever we take these types of things on. Another thing that he said during the court case that I think on the second day that I think is very revealing is he was asked about... now, this is going to give you a lot of insights on what could happen in the future in your own country when it comes to this type of ideology. So Oppenheimer presented a farm murder case to Malema where a mother and daughter were tortured to death, as I mentioned earlier, and the words "kill the Boer" were written on their home's wall in their blood. Malema then responds by calling this mere criminality, and then he starts talking about a case of a white farmer who allegedly killed a 13-year-old black child. And then Oppenheimer asks Malema if he considers that a racist murder. And then Malema responds that it was driven by a racist motive because the farmer was in a position of power. Then Oppenheimer asks him whether the torturers who tortured a white mother and daughter to death and who wrote "kill the Boer" in blood on their wall were in a position of power over those two women. And then Malema answers, we do not know whether they were farmers. We do not know their social standing. We do not know whether their relationship to the means of production. So here he's actually going a little bit more back to the classic Marxist theory in regards to power. But I mean, this shows you, and I mean, I can put it on the record now. I don't think Mr. Malema is someone that's just peddling his ideology because it will give him power and influence. I think he's a genuine believer. I think he genuinely believes what he says. If I look at how he answers questions, if you have to answer a question like, what does your political party stand for? I mean, if you're just a grifter or you're just using ideology as your vehicle to power, you can easily answer that question. But if you're being asked questions regarding very specific scenarios, and you still, without even thinking, you just give straightforward answers in accordance to your ideology, that shows me that you're a true believer, like you genuinely believe what you're saying. And this is a guy who believes that your position or your relationship to the means of production determine whether you can your murderers that tortured you to death were motivated by a racist motive.
Well, I have some of the clips that you were talking about. I don't think this one's getting monetized, so no worries. So let me go pull up one of them. And well, you had mentioned, of course, the singing outside of the trial. So I guess we'll put a little bit of that. I guess we will.
You'll see me in the video. I'm the guy with the orange buff.
Gotcha. Well, we'll warn everyone now that this will be a little intense. So let me go share screen real quick. There we go. And let me make sure that I can share the audio here real quick. So hold on. But yeah, and there we go. Share system audio. I have to remember that every time I do it. But yeah, here we go. Sorry, guys. So yeah, there you go. And I think as someone put it in the chat that this is something that you guys kind of put up with on a daily basis.
Well, this is something that you get pretty much in your face whenever the EFF does a rally, whenever they get together, and then it's blasted all over the media. I mean, it's their type of rhetoric. This type of singing the media usually doesn't cover, but you get it through social media, through the EFF sharing it. But yeah, that's pretty much what we experienced the second day when we go heading out of court.
And when do you expect to be back? I know that you had said that there's closing arguments, and then you'll hope to hear a verdict sometime this year, or maybe not, who knows. But when do you go back?
Well, we're going back, I think, somewhere in March. It's going to be concluding remarks, and then we're going to have to wait for a verdict. That could be anywhere from a month to many months before we hear the verdict there, but we will be keeping people up to date. I mean, it's going to be first thing on our website and our social media when we get that, so you can't miss it if you follow those.
And I will make sure that all of those are put in the description. I do have the Friends of AfriForum and your links down below. So if people do want to know more from an outsider's perspective, then you can, by all means, head to those websites below. But I mean, you've had success in the past. I mean, he's been convicted in the past. What do you feel like the odds are here? If you could give a guess or speculate.
Well, when it comes to South African court cases, you never know. There's a lot of judges in South Africa that are politically captured, which was now revealed with the Zondo Commission last year. But with this judge, you don't know. I haven't checked his other verdicts. He seemed quite subjective in this case. I've seen much worse in the past. But the thing is, we don't know. We're going to have to see. For me, we've done more than enough to prove our case. I think our advocate was very good. I think our cross-examination was done very well. Our experts that we called and witnesses that we called were impeccable. So I think we have a very strong case just based on the evidence presented here. We're going to have to see. But I think we stand a strong chance of winning this case. If I had to bet some money on it, I would say we're going to win it. What we're going to win, that's the question, seeing as we're asking for quite a bit. We're asking, firstly, that the EFF, if we are asking them to pay 500,000 Rand to a non-profit organization that fights violent hate speech like this. We also are asking them to do a public apology, and then we're also asking that the case be referred to the MPA for a further case on I'm losing myself in translation in my head now, for a contempt of court. That was I was looking for a contempt of court case. So yeah, and then also we also wanted to expose Julius, and that's what we did very succinctly. But we're going to have to see. I'm very positive about it. Our legal team is very positive, but whether we get everything that we ask for, that's a different thing. I don't think we might maybe not get everything. That's a very strong possibility, but I do feel very strongly that we're going to win the case.
Well, then I had really just one more question for you, which is, I mean, we've talked about this. We've talked about the political situation. You and I have talked about this numerous times before, not on the air. But to those who are watching and those who will watch this when it's not live, who may not live in South Africa and may live in the United States or Canada or all over Europe, why does this case matter? And why should it be something that non-South Africans care about? Because while the news is all focused on Ukraine and Russia right now, why should we care?
Well, I think this is, I'm not going to be revolutionary in saying why I think it matters. I think firstly it matters because it gives you an insight into the road that your own country could go down. South Africa is built on a Western foundation. So all the recipe ingredients are here that your own society is made from. So don't think that this is now relegated to there on the other side of the world in Africa. It's never going to come to my country. South Africa is not an African country in the strict sense in regards to all our institutions, our laws, our constitution. We are very westernized in that regard. So all the recipe that gave us the cake that is South Africa, those ingredients are in your country as well. Your cake is also made from many of the same ingredients, maybe different ratios, but the foundation is there. And that's the thing that a lot of Americans, I think, and a lot of Europeans need to take into account. Specifically, if you look at things like the Constitution. I mean, South Africa's Constitution was lauded in the 90s as like the second best document after the Bible. And this is going to save South Africa, and the Constitution is going to keep everyone safe. But we've seen it fail in many regards, in regards to specifically minority communities, minority rights, linguistic rights, preserving people's heritage, or helping communities preserve their heritage, not having minorities discriminated against based on their race or culture or language. There, the Constitution has very much failed in many cases, and this is a lesson that you need to learn. The best way to sum it up is my colleague Ernst Van Zyl actually puts it very nicely. He says, it's not the Constitution that holds ultimate power. It's those that interpret it that hold ultimate power. So your Constitution, I mean, I know you Americans are very holy about your Constitution, but you have to remember, it's just a document. It can't fight your battles for you. The Constitution's power lies in those who interpret it. And when that person, it comes to a point where the zeitgeist is so skewed, your Constitution can be interpreted in very radically different ways than it was intended, or that you even think that it is what it means. I mean, South Africa has a very classically liberal constitution, but it is on a daily basis interpreted in radically socialistic and leftist ways. And not just by laymen, by people in the law, people in the government, people in parliament, people shaping policy. And that's the big lesson that you need to remember, is that those interpreting the Constitution hold all the power. Then back to the case, why it's important. Well, firstly, that I just mentioned, you can learn that this is not a guarantee where your society is going down, but it is a very strong possibility that your society could go down this route. Because seeing as a lot of this doesn't originate in South Africa. A lot of what's happening here in our politics is actually ideas that are being imported from America, things like critical race theory, social justice stuff, all these radical leftist ideas or woke ideas. And I hate using that term because it's just so overly used, but you get, I want to use it because then you know exactly what I'm talking about. These ideas didn't originate in South Africa, but they imported here, and then they produce results here, maybe even before they do in the United States, for the reasons of our national context. So that's also something that you can take into account, is the fact that you're battling many of the same ideas that have already taken root in South Africa and have flourished in South Africa, and they are producing monsters like Julius Malema, and he's not being hated by the media or the commentariat. He's being lauded and fawned over as if he is the new gift to democracy. So that's also something you have to take into account. And then also another lesson that you can learn is the fact that if you stand up within this type of zeitgeist to this type of wickedness and evil, there are going to be many detractors that are going to focus on attacking you rather than the actual evil and wickedness that you're attacking. And many of those people that are going to be attacking you are not going to be leftists, or are not going to be Marxists or communists. Many of them are going to be liberals, not in the American sense, in the genuine sense. They're going to consider themselves liberals. They're going to say, well, I'm a constitutionalist. I'm interpreting the Constitution as it was meant. I'm a classical liberal. I believe in freedom of speech, but I believe in property rights. But that's where we've gotten to, and that's where there's this big debate in South Africa regarding, are individual rights and constitutionally guaranteed rights enough to really protect minority communities? Because in South Africa, it has proven that they are not enough. That doesn't mean that individual rights should be completely thrown out the window, but they should be supplemented by other things as well, like community building, security networks, do-it-yourself mentality like AfriForum is doing, state proofing. You can't just rely on individual rights and your constitution to save you. And then maybe a last thing that I wanted to mention on the stream, it's not exactly an answer of your question, but I will work it into it. Like who was it? Was it Kissinger that said, "I'm just waiting for you to ask your question so that I can give you the answer that I wanted." And the thing that I wanted to also bring up in the stream quickly is the fact that the reactions to the AfriForum versus Malema EFF case, I actually did a thread on this on Twitter, has revealed a lot of the nature of white progressive liberal thinking regarding race. So in the end, what I concluded is that the idea of paternalism championed by the British Empire never ended after all. You see this in all the reactions to this court case. So, for example, white progressive liberals tend to see themselves as having like a guardianship role in relation to their black compatriots. Guardianship in like a legal guardian. You're you're looking after them. So when a black leader, for example, says something that they find disturbing or wrong, like for example what Julius Malema said in court last week, or in this case, they feel that it's their responsibility to adequately and clearly explain and clarify what he actually meant, just as a parent would when their child says something that maybe didn't come out right, or that needs more context. And this is something that we saw with this case specifically, is this white liberal paternalism that comes out very clearly. There's also, to add to that, the white progressive liberal perception of guardianship also produces the type of fawning that I described in this stream tonight with you. This type of fawning over what their black compatriots or political figures in their country say. Almost like that type of when your teacher in first grade, you do your oral presentation, and then your teacher is like, "Wow, Bobby, that was the best speech I've ever heard in my life. You are going to be president one day." That's what we get in South Africa, and specifically regarding our president currently. We actually have a Twitter account called Simps for Cyril Ramaphosa, our president, that documents all these people that just lose their minds over Cyril Ramaphosa is the next Churchill when it comes to his speeches, but he just says like all these Davosisms and platitudes. But that's the other thing, is that you get that. And then lastly, you get this, lastly, you get these white progressive liberals hold public figures like my colleague Ernst Van Zyl and the organization that I work for, AfriForum, to the standards of adults. So when you say something, you mean it. But black politicians in our country are held to the standard of youths. So when they say something like, oh, kill the boer, kill the farmer, all these commentariats just rush to their defense and say, actually, no, it's a metaphor. You don't understand what they mean. They don't really mean kill when they say kill. But when AfriForum says, yeah, stop that, they say, oh, well, AfriForum is dog whistling that they are evil people, clearly. But maybe to conclude, one of my favorite South African, or one of the best South African cartoons or cartoonist depictions of the issue of farm murders is surrounding this issue of, I think it came out around the time of that first court case surrounding Kill the Boer in 2011. It's this, the scene is of these two farm murderers running away from the crime scene, and there's a newspaper on the floor that says singing of Kill the Boer metaphor in court, taken to court. And then the one farm murderer looks at the other one and he asks him, what's a metaphor? And that just gives you the idea. But anyway, yeah, that's, I think, would conclude the lessons. But maybe I should end on a white pill, seeing as that's something that I think is very important in today's
Well,
time.
there are a few questions for you as well with the super
Yeah,
chat.
sure, we can get to that. Yeah, maybe I'll keep the white pill for my conclusionary remarks.
Sounds good. So we'll go through these rather quickly then.
Sure.
So let's start here. His name is Lil Altorera. He donated $5 New Zealand. I'll have to convert that to USD. But it says, keeps doing what you're doing. CC, cheers from New Zealand.
Oh, excellent. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your support and your kind words.
Well, this one will probably be the most spicy thing that gets asked this afternoon. But this is from Dustbreaker for 400 Rand, which I think is like, what, 25, 26 bucks. So he says, why does AfriForum condemn explicit white advocacy when we have people openly discussing the murdering of all whites? How are we as white South Africans to know that AfriForum won't be the ones that sell us out and smear us as racists when things hit the fan?
Well, I think I can answer that quite succinctly, but I also don't think it's a question that should just be brushed off with a trivial answer. So firstly, AfriForum has actually published a piece on this, and I think this is what he's referring to, where he rejected white nationalism. He calls it white advocacy, but we specifically do not associate with or support white nationalism, because the thing is, you have to look at this in the bigger picture. I mean, there's a very large conversation here to be had. Well, if you look at the US and you compare it to South Africa, there's a massive difference when it comes to who you see as your people. I remember there was once an American that told me, all you Boers should just immigrate there from South Africa and join your people in the United States. And I told him, like, I don't think you understand what my people are. I don't really feel a brotherly connection to a white Russian or to a white Czech. For me, my people are Afrikaners. My people are my cultural group. And I mean, white nationalism is a modern concept. It's a concept that came from pretty much the British Empire and from imperial ideas of it's a universalist idea of universal white brotherhood all across the world. I'm like, yeah, sure, dude. Okay. Where was that universal white brotherhood when the British were putting Afrikaners in concentration camps? That doesn't really translate into reality. When your country or your nation or your community is going into tough times, you're going to have to know who are your friends and who are your enemies. You're going to have to do that friend-enemy distinction. If you're identifying your friends based on race, you're going to have a tough time. You're going to be backstabbed within the first day of your society collapsing. You're going to have to, your people are those that share your values, your worldview, people that you can actually have a conversation with, and they won't just look at you and say it feels like you're from a different planet. Your people are a culture would be a good example of a way to demarcate or identify where your people or your allies or your friends are. Your culture has values attached to it. Your culture has a worldview, a broad worldview attached to it. Your culture has origin myths attached to it. Your culture has all these different, very intricate layers attached to it that actually give you a very strong, powerful framework. Your race really doesn't have the same type of solid ground to stand on. And this is something that you're going to have to learn. A good example is, and this is a lesson that maybe a lot of foreigners can learn from South Africa, is that, and this is maybe a tough lesson for some people to learn, is that the fact that you can't just rely on race to see who are your friends and your enemies. A good example would be, for example, the Japanese. The Japanese don't view themselves as Asian nationalists. They're proud to be Japanese. They love being Japanese. They love their country of Japan. They don't feel any type of nationalism or brotherhood with the Chinese. I mean, just look at the type of policy or the type of politics and rhetoric that fly between those two countries. If they were race nationalists, they would see the Chinese as their brothers, but they absolutely don't. Same go for the Russians. The Russians don't see themselves as first and foremost the white part of the white alliance, global alliance, whatever you want to call it. They see themselves as Russians. They're proud Russians. They're proud to be Russians. They don't say, well, we're doing this for the white race. We want to defend the white race. That's not what they do. Same goes for the Chinese. Same goes for many of the great civilizations throughout history, is that they're not fighting for what they love based on something as race. They're basing it on something as concrete, as culture, something as a shared community and culture. And I think that's actually a very pertinent topic that a lot of people have to consider. I don't think, especially if your country is going into hard times, like I said, you're going to have to be able to identify who's your friend and who's your enemy. And your greatest enemies are going to be people of the same race as you. And if you let them into your camp and let them into your fort or into your territory just because they are the same race as you, they're going, and I'm oversimplifying, but then you're going to be in for a tough time. And this is something that you're going to have to learn. Why do you think in South Africa, as things get more difficult, people keep falling back on concrete things like cultural identity rather than racial identity? Why do, for example, the broad amount of Black South Africans, why do they still regard themselves as first and foremost Xhosas, Zulus, Chongas, Vendas rather than Black people? And it's a very Americanized Anglo world idea of like seeing yourself as a white person or a Black person first in your hierarchy of identities. I don't see myself as white first. I'm firstly a Christian, and then secondly, I'm an Afrikaner. That's how my hierarchy starts. And that's something that's in South Africa very, very evident. And I think maybe just a final point there, this is a fascinating topic for me. I mean, I could talk very long on it, but I'll briefly finish here. If you really think that you can see who's your allies based on their race, then that's pretty much just a product of growing up in a country where everyone of your race shares your culture very broadly and very blatantly. And I mean, I think America is a good example of that, where there's a very broad cultural conformity all across the country, compared relatively to, for example, a Frenchman versus a German, or Afrikaner versus an Anglo, or a Zulu versus a Xhosa, or a Chonga versus a Venda. Massive disparities culturally, same race, but you in South Africa have 500-year-old blood feuds based on cultural history, not so much on racial history. You see this where you have, for example, many Black cultures that get along very well with Afrikaners, much better than they get along with, for example, other Black cultures that they have a historical antagonism towards based on many factors within history. So I think I think it's also a very American, and maybe even just coming from a very culturally homogenized society. When things start getting tougher, you don't really see as culture as your demarcation of who you can trust. And that's the thing, is that I think this is something that you're going to learn the hard way even more as things get tougher, is that the people you can really trust are the people that you can sit around a camp or sit around a fire with in the cultural sense, people that understand your larger cultural context. But yeah, that's something that we as Afrikaners have learned over the years in South Africa. There's still a massive difference between culturally between Anglo and Afrikaner South Africans, both white, but still live in their little own self-segregated cultural enclaves. And the same goes, I think I'll end with this, something to ponder. There's a larger difference, cultural difference between a white Afrikaner and a white American than between a black and a white American. Culturally speaking, there's a larger difference. I think that's something that I'll end on answering that question with.
Well, I think that maybe the only thing I would add to that would just be that may be the case from a perception, but to those that wish me harm or to those that wish ill will, they may not paint a finer picture with a finer brush. They may use something a little more broad, while you might opt for a scalpel. They might opt for a sledgehammer. But there is one more question. This is from Bolero 393, $4.99 US. He says, what is the best case scenario for what politics and day-to-day life for Afrikaans and other white South Africans would look like in the next 10 to 20 years? So maybe this is a good way to plug in your white pill.
So if I understand the question correctly, what would be the ideal realistic future looking forward? If I understand, is that the question?
Yeah. What's the ideal picture look like in a couple of decades?
Well, I'm not someone to dwell too much on idealism. As Carl Jung said, all addictive substances are bad, whether it be alcohol, heroin, or idealism. But I do think that there are some very good outcomes that we are fighting towards. The one would be that let's go for Afrikaners specifically, because that's the line of work where I work for a primarily Afrikaner organization, and work with Afrikaner-based issues very strongly mostly in my daily work. The ideal outcome in the future would be for us to have our own institutions that guarantee that our language survives and our culture survives, and that our values and our heritage are protected and taken into the future. As MP Van Zyl said, your culture is a valuable treasure that you have to carry through the masses or through the crowd and protect it. So, I mean, that's what I would like to see in the future. I would like to see that, and this is what we're working towards, that there's a future for Afrikaners in Africa. Immigration might be a solution on an individual level, but it's not a cultural solution. You can't immigrate an entire community and think they'll survive. They will, within 2 or 3 generations, will start assimilating into their host countries. That's very much what we've seen with Afrikaners. But in regards to what we would like to see in the future, firstly, that's preservation of our language, heritage, culture. Also, the better and much better safety rurally in regards to farmers and the reduction in farm murders and better rural security. And then also just becoming more state-proof in all the forms that takes, whether that state-proofing be security, preservation of your heritage, whether that state-proofing be your own financial system that you can use to make yourself more secure, that the government can't just turn off or freeze your bank account. All these type of state-proof solutions, turning them from ideas into reality would be the ideal in the future. We've already turned many of them into reality, like, for example, building our own technical college, done. Busy building our own university campus, 1.8 billion rand project that we are currently working on. These are the types of things that I'd like to see finished in the future. They're already well on their way, but yeah, that's what I'd like to see. And then also on a broader picture, as MP Van Zyl also wrote, in the modern world, no community is an island anymore. You can't just live in complete isolation. You also need to, let me sum it up in this quote. So MP Van Zyl said that every culture in the world is a unique instrument in the orchestra of God. Therefore, my mission as well, and what I would like to achieve in a future that I would like to see, is the future where cultures don't go extinct. I don't want a future where there aren't any Zulus or Xhosas or Chongas or Vendas in South Africa anymore. I want those cultures to survive as well because of their unique position in the orchestra of God. I want them to also have a future that they can be proud of, and that if they're proud of their culture and their heritage, they should be allowed to do so and to not be shamed or smeared as backwards because they are so. That's why I do my culture series on my channel, where I talk to people from different cultures to really see what they're about and what they stand for. So when it comes to our missions, that's very broadly what we want to achieve, and from my own personal perspective, I'd like to have my children grow up in Africa and see themselves and know that they are Afrikaners, know where their ancestors come from, where their ancestors sleep, and to know that they come from a line of brave men that fought for their privilege to be here, and that they don't want to be anywhere else than here in Africa.
Well, I think that gives us a good point to sort of conclude there. Is there anything that you want to shill, let us know, and let people know what you're working on?
Well, I think there's a lot of cross-pollination between our two channels, but if you're unaware, you can go check out my YouTube channel called Conscious Caracal, and you can also follow me on Twitter, Conscious Caracal. And then if you also want to support AfriForum and what we do, you can also, maybe I think the majority of your listeners are abroad. That means you won't be able to become a member of AfriForum, but you can become a friend of AfriForum to make a once-off donation or a monthly donation. You just Google Friends of AfriForum and you fill in the little form. Then when it comes to people living in South Africa, you can become a supporter of AfriForum by going to our website and clicking join and becoming a member. And then you can help all these different initiatives that we're busy with. And then also, Prude, I'd just like to say thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you very much for giving me the platform to talk about not just the court case, but also what's happening in South Africa. I think I can then maybe end on that white pill that I wanted to get to. And that is, it might be difficult when you realize that, the old saying goes, bad times create strong men create good times create weak men. But when you live in good times, you have the opportunity to live a comfortable life. But when you live in hard times, you have an opportunity to live a great life, to live a very meaningful life. And there's an abundance of opportunity to live a meaningful, fulfilled life. It might be risky, might be a very dangerous life, might not be a comfortable life, but it will be filled with meaning and purpose. And you will feel as if you get the opportunity to be a very meaningful chain, a little link in the great chain of being, in your chain of ancestors. And I think that's a very valuable thing to realize when you live in hard times. So I think that's something that I would like to leave people with, is that don't throw yourself a pity party because you live in these types of times, and you rather live in a better past where things look much more rosy and better. Rather cherish the fact that you're living in a time where you are going to be faced with massive challenges, but when you overcome those challenges, you will get immense amounts of meaning and fulfillment from conquering those challenges unique to your time. And I think that's what I want to leave people with, is that take heart from the fact that all the greatest heroes in your culture of your civilization didn't come to the fore during good times. They came to the fore during bad times, during hard times. So not only will you see many great figures come to the fore during hard times, you also have an opportunity to be an influential great figure in your own capacity. I'm not talking about being a Napoleon type of figure, but being a great figure within your community. You don't have to have a statue built to you. You don't have to have books written about you, but you can live a great, fulfilling, meaningful life, an impactful life within your community. And you can do it without all the glamorous type of fanfare that comes with having, like, for example, like I said, a statue or like some type of a thing named after you. You can, the reward is that fulfillment. The reward is that meaning. And that's something that so many young men crave in the Western world today. And I want to give you the reassurance that even though you're going into hard times, you're going to have a lot more opportunity to get what you crave when it comes to something as abstract and transcendental as fulfillment and meaning.
Yeah, and in fact, I thought that it would be rather fitting to to end things on a note that I thought would be very appropriate, considering what we've talked about in the past. There's a quote I'd like to bring up, but while we get there, while it loads, if it will, I do know that Saint Silouan had always said that do not be cast down over the struggle. The Lord loves a brave warrior, and the Lord loves a soul that is valiant. And I think that the work that you're doing illustrates that, and I think that it also gives us a very good framework for the future about what we need to do and what we need to work on. And so, like I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, all of the super chats that were donated, I will make that a one-time donation to AfriForum. And Ernst, as always, thank you for the work that you do. All of the links will be down in the description, and I will see you all next Sunday. That time I'll be covering Ukraine and Russia and everything. So
because you have to.
Because I have to. Yes, I'm the geopolitics guy. So again, thank you all for tuning in, watching. Ernst, thank you so much for coming on. And we'll see you all next time. Be prudent, everybody.